Good evening, everyone. The Ranter is back to go into yet another rambling diatribe of the news of the day. And I did this in the last video. It looks like I'm going to have to continue on with this thought process and go back into the definition of what woke means. Now, woke in the political terms, we would say is, as according to the Merriam-Webster dictionary version, woke as an adjective is aware of and actively attentive to important societal facts and issues, especially issues of racial and social justice. Okay? Alright. I bring this up because, again, the term woke is being used by the individuals on the conservative side of things in a different version of its definition, because down the definitions to the second version of woke as an adjective, the disapproving version, is politically liberal, as in matters of racial and social justice, especially in a way that is considered unreasonable or extreme. Okay, so that is the one way and the other way. And think about this. Well, I was thinking of doing a video on this, and I was going back and forth, and then I saw an article, which I'm going to read to you about, concerning a textbook in Florida that apparently the publishers was trying hard to try to adhere to this Stop Woke law that they have in Florida. So the publisher, who claims they did a little overreaction on this, this book, this history book, which talked about Rosa Parks and the incident of Rosa Parks, and decided not to mention that Rosa Parks was black or that the issue had anything to do with segregation. Okay, so let's get into that. This article is from MSN.com, from Snopes. Was Florida's textbook altered to remove the mention of Rosa Parks' race? Claim. In an effort to comply with Florida's new Stop Woke Act law, the publisher of a Florida textbook altered the section on Rosa Parks to remove any mention of her race or of racial segregation. Survey says the rating is true. Context. The publisher says the changes provided to the Florida officials were an overreaction to a vague written Florida law. The publisher has since rewritten the section on Rosa Parks to include the mention of her race in the most recent version of that lesson. On March 19, 2023, 2 days ago, the New York Times reported on the purported changes to the school lesson on Rosa Parks made by a publisher, Studies Weekly, when submitting its material to the Florida State Review of Educational Materials. In an attempt to cater to Florida, at least one publisher made significant changes to its materials, walking back or omitting references to race, even in its telling of the Rosa Parks story. The publisher, Studies Weekly, mostly serves younger students with a focus on science and social studies in its curriculum. Short lessons and weekly pamphlets is used in 45,000 schools across the country, according to its website. Its social studies materials are used in Florida elementary schools today. The New York Times compared three versions of the company's Rosa Parks story, meant for first graders, a current lesson used now in Florida, an initial version created for the state textbook review, and a second updated version. With the 2022 passage of the Stop Woke Act, championed by Republican Governor Ron DeSantis, Florida state law prohibited instruction that would, as the New York Times described, quote, compel students to feel responsibility, guilt, or anguish for what other members of their race did in the past among other limits, unquote. Specifically, the law reads. Specifically, the law reads. Let's try that again. It shall constitute discrimination on the basis of race, color, national origin, or sex under this section to subject any student or employee to training or instruction that espouses, promotes, advances, inculcates, pardon that, I butchered that, didn't I? Or compels such student or employee to believe a person, by virtue of his or her race, color, sex, or national origin, bears personal responsibility for and must feel guilt, anguish, or other forms of psychological distress because of the actions in which the person played no part in committing in the past by other members of the same race, color, national origin, or sex. In Florida, the educational materials must be approved at a state level, with different subjects undergoing a review each year. But the text of this law, critics have noted, is vague and potentially makes it a violation of law to teach about historical events involving racial injustice. The New York Times reporting focused on examples of publishers changing material in an effort to satisfy the law. With respect to Rosa Parks, the Times analyzed 3 versions of the lessons. These included the versions of the lessons currently approved, pre-2023 review, a version that was first submitted to the Florida regulators for review, an initial version for review, and a reworked version of the same review. In the current lesson of Rosa Parks, segregation is clearly explained. The law said African Americans had to give up their seats on the bus if a white person wanted to sit down, unquote. But in the initial version created for the textbook review, race is mentioned indirectly. She was told to move to a different seat because of the color of her skin, the lesson said. In the initial version of the review, Miss Parks was told to move because of, quote, the color of her skin, unquote. In the updated version submitted to the textbook review, race was not mentioned at all. She was told to move to a different seat. The lesson said, without an explanation of segregation. No. The changes made for Florida Review were first highlighted by the anti-censorship group Florida Freedom to read in November 2022. In a news release, Studies Weekly confirmed that such a change was made for the review, but it argued that it was an internal mistake and an overreaction. Because the Florida Department of Education, can't speak tonight, sorry guys and gals. Because of the Florida Department of Education provided no guidance on interpreting the Florida House Bill 7, Studies Weekly, like every publisher, has had to decipher how to comply with their legislation. That being said, during the Florida Social Studies adoption, individuals of our curriculum team severely overreacted in their interpretation of HB 7 and made unapproved revisions. Typically, our quality assurance processes would have flagged and denied edit approval. Unfortunately, during the final hours before the deadline, they circumvented our established protocols in an attempt to submit their revisions on time. We have identified those individuals, taken corrective action, and implemented additional safeguards to avoid any issues in the future. The company said that the version sent for review will not enter any curriculum, and the organization has added mention of race to the story. We find the omission of altering of historical facts to be abhorrent, and we do not defend it, the company added. Because, however, Studies Weekly acknowledged the change and stated that was in response to the Stop Woke Act, the claim that the publisher altered, at least temporarily, a lessons on Rosa Parks to avoid any mention of race is true. Alright. Okay. So I wanted to read that out to you because I saw that earlier today, and that just sort of like triggered me to do this. Yeah. So there's that. And just sort of throw a little bit more upon this issue from my point of view on this. A Fox co-host of The Five has been mocked for her attempt of defining what woke is, and her inability to do so, so she decided to give up on the whole thing entirely. So, this is from The Independent. Fox News mocked for saying woke shouldn't be defined. It could be a feeling. It could be a sense. Or I'm making it a little bit more melodramatic, but there's a point. The term woke appeared to be immune to all definition, at least by conservative commentators. Fox News' Dana Perino, a co-host of roundtable talk show The Five, stumbled through her own attempt to explain woke, eventually invoking the Supreme Court's obscenity observation, quote, "I know it when I see it," unquote, and likened it more to a feeling. Quote, one of the things about woke, can you explain it to your mom? Miss Perino said before recounting how Donald Trump used it to get standing ovations for deriding the ideas of, quote, political correctness, unquote. She then made obscenity comparisons, saying woke is, quote, sort of like the Supreme Court's definition of pornography. You know it when you see it, unquote. She then says, Democrats want to get you in an argument where they have you define wokeism, as in the Webster Dictionary is defining it. As if the Webster's Dictionary is defining it. That's not what it is, she says. It could be a feeling. It could be a sense. The discussion was sparked after former White House Press Secretary Jen Psaki explored on her new MSN show how conservatives demonstrated the idea that they consider woke appears to have backfired in the midterm elections and may do so again in 2024. Ms. Perino's argument that wokeness is more of a vibe that causes people to put pronouns in their Twitter bio might be less notable if Republican candidates and incumbents were not actively running campaigns based on anti-woke culture war rhetoric. Donald Trump and Florida Governor Ron DeSantis, who are expected to be primary contenders in the 2024 presidential primary, both frequently use the word woke in their campaign speeches, always as a term of derision. Former Trump official and 2024 candidate Nikki Haley told the audience at CPAC that wokeness is a virus more dangerous than any pandemic. And Vivek, I'm going to butcher this, sorry guys and gals, Ramaswamy, is also running for the presidency as a Republican, wrote a book aimed at fixing the woke industrial complex in U.S. companies. Again, sorry for the mispronunciation. The meta-debate about woke reached its boiling point last week after a USA Today IPSOS poll found that most Americans have a positive definition of the word. Some conservatives, like former Trump press secretary turned Fox News host Kayleigh McEnany, refuse to acknowledge the poll's findings. She leans into the cognitive dissonance and resonance that normal people, the ones who would not have favorable definitions of the word woke, likely just hung up on the pollsters and thus their opinions were not included. Bethany Mandel, the conservative author and blogger, struggled during the appearance on The Hill's Rising when co-host Brianna Joy Gray asked her to define woke. We've discussed this, and Vin discussed this on his own video. Miss Mandel, who wrote a book detailing her problems with what she sees as woke culture, failed to produce any coherent definition of the word, and correctly predicted that her fumble would go viral. Ms. Pereira's wobbly attempt to approach the definition of woke was met with similar mockery on social media. Kat Abu, sorry about that, a journalist who covers right-wing media space and wrote something facts and feelings, is likely a reference to the conservative commentator Ben Shapiro's oft-repeated catchphrase, facts don't care about your feelings. Is wokeism in the room with them right now? Dr. Ryan Marino asked. Eric Reinhardt, a physician and political commentator, pointed out the absurdity of something that could only be described as a sense or feeling being used to justify legislative actions. Quote, "Don't let anyone tell you your undefined feelings and vague senses, such as racist and transphobic paranoia, aren't a legitimate basis for making state policy and enforcing book bans in schools," he wrote. From news to politics, travel to sports, culture to climate, The Independent has a host of free newsletters suited your interests. So I'm promoting Independent, so take that. They should not have that in the body, but there it is. Alright. Outside of that plug for The Independent, what pisses me off, and I'm glad, at least in the first article, it is mentioned that they made the correction to it. But the knee-jerk reaction, this overreaction to the Stop Woke Act in Florida, was to whitewash away a historical moment in our country for fear it might be too woke is galling and ridiculous and pathetic. And it was something that I was kind of joking about in my last video. Because when I asked, what, is slavery too woke? Is segregation too woke? Is Jim Crow too woke? Well, I guess so, at least in some people's minds. This is not going to be long, because, well, maybe it will be, I don't know, depending on how far I'm going to rant about this. But I mentioned it before, and I just kind of mentioned it now. I just really have a problem with this impulse to, like, not take history at face value, not try to, educate what was bad about history, try to show how we are supposed to be better now than we are then. The definitions that I did for woke, and both of them, from the adjective and from the disapproving, or what is being used against Democrats and liberals, or just anything conservatives don't like, is suddenly magically woke, no matter what it is. If it's the person's speech, or education, or business practices, or appliances. Marsha Blackburn was complaining about the wokeness of a washer machine because of what the content of the water being used in it, like low flow toilets. That's woke too, apparently. In their definition, in their disapproving definition, I'm going to reread it. Okay? Their disapproving definition, the second definition of woke in the adjective: politically liberal, as in matters of racial and social injustice, especially in a way that is considered unreasonable or extreme. What they say, like in terms of the body of the definition of their Stop Woke Act in Florida, is that these measures against wokeness is being implemented to make sure people who don't feel bad about themselves because of the color of their skin or their ideology or their sex or whatever, if someone of a similar skin pigmentation did something to somebody else, that they personally shouldn't feel bad about it. Well, in a way, they shouldn't feel bad about it, but there should be a conversation as to why they think that people will feel bad about it. And it's kind of it makes me wonder, what are these people assuming? I mean, little white boys and girls are going to feel that something that happened 50, 60, 70 years ago, they're going to personally, children, single-digit children, are personally going to take it onto themselves that, oh, I'm bad because great-grandpa or great-grandma, back in the day, did something really shitty, or some really shitty things happened in the past, and we're going to take it onto themselves. Who even says that on the other side of here? Who is going to say, as an adult, going to tell like white children that because of someone in their ancestry did something bad, or someone at least of their same skin pigmentation were doing shitty and bad shit, that responsibility and that guilt and that consequence should fall down to anybody else with the same skin pigmentation? Who actually says that? Because outside of maybe people who are just irrational, who just wants to cause that argument, or maybe people who are children themselves, who are not adults, who are not mature, who are just in school themselves as kids. Maybe they hear something of the history and then they react to somebody else. Well, kids do that, regardless of the curriculum. But that should not be the excuse to make history go away, or claim that the study of history is bad or too woke. Because once again, I had asked in the last video, and I'm going to ask again, are these people then saying that critical race theory, which not in grade school, not there, not even in high school, it's a graduate level study, a theory taught in law school. But as I asked, are these people telling us that the teaching of American slavery is that critical race theory? Is the teaching of segregation critical race theory? Is the history of civil rights critical race theory? Because, as I say, critical race theory, and I started this with the concept of wokeness, as buzzwords, they go hand in hand in the connection. Now, wokeness, because of the disapproving definition, is thrown out to be anything. I mean, what was woke, which is now, suddenly, 10 or so years ago, we would call that green. The Green New Deal. From the ideas of being to worry about stuff like low flow toilets or different types of light bulbs, or trying to save the environment, environmental friendly shit. Well, that's too green. Well, wokeness, which has nothing to do with the environment, now we're gonna throw that stuff over there because woke is now a catch-all for anything that you don't like. Anything, if you're conservative, anything you don't like, that's it. It's woke. It's woke, and it's the same thing as socialism. Socialism is super awful and bad, and they will worry about it when they're on the public metro bus, as they look out to the garbage trucks that pick up people's garbage, and all the other things that are actually socialism that they are enjoying the accommodations of. But the same people who would say that President Joe Biden is the most socialist president we've ever seen. How is this centrist Democrat who spent many, many years comfortably siding up with Republicans. The socialist woke President Biden, who in the 70s sided with racist fuck Republicans on busing. Talking about he didn't want his kids to be on a bus going through the jungle. Or for the crime bill in the 90s. Or hell, being the Democrat that helped get Clarence Thomas on the Supreme Court. Yeah, he's super liberal. He is woke and socialist. Yeah, he's a cultural Marxist. You know, when I was keep thinking about the term woke, and especially the slur, the disapproving version that I read the definition twice of, I had this like really annoyed, crass impulse to like just rat out a tasteless frickin' joke about woke, and how, you know, here's the handy dandy way of saying woke and using it, you know, and you have all the different ways of saying woke, and make it oddly, hauntingly similar to how people said a certain word starting with N. You know, we have like the one word, you know, have woke, but have that R there, and then, you know, really stick that R right there. Because if you really want to be inference, just add that R, right? And then, or, you know, if you want to be more slang about it, then just add an A and an H. Or maybe add more metaphors, which is similar to that, you know? And then, you know, present it like a handy dandy little pamphlet for these people with 5 or so brain cells who find any of this stuff fucking funny. We got a lot of shit going on that is serious in this world. And Republicans who are, you know, have like minor control in the House, so all they can do is make noise in this bullshit, who wants to blame everything under the sun on being woke, regardless of what it is, who it is. And right now, as I've shown of the co-host on the 5, apparently can't define woke, but you know what? Let's not even define it. No. It's a feeling. It's a sense. You know wokeism when you see it. You don't need a definition. It's like porn. People are throwing books away from libraries, calling it porn. When if you look in those books, there's probably nothing pornographic in it whatsoever. It might be, you know, just off color, or maybe a little risque in its terminology concerning, you know, whatever sexual act is being like discussed in whatever clinical kind of way, depending upon the book, depending upon in the library. And I trust these people to know it when they see it, right? So yeah, part of me really sees their usage of woke is pretty much the usage of the N-word. And, you know, I was thinking about that today when I was going to come up to this video, and how I was raised from my parents. In our household, you know, just Italian father, Irish mother. I am one of the people, the majority of a peach apricot skin pigmentation that, you know, as Vince said in his video, you know, the people who don't see color, the people who are in the majority that don't see it. He's absolutely right, because of the example that he chose to explain how that comes to be is spot on. I know that because my dad spent some time in Forestville, Maryland, and it was a pretty much a black community, black neighborhood. So being on going up and down the street with my stepbrother, and seeing it, and you see that, yeah, you're a little bit outnumbered, and no one was ever mean. No one ever came up. No one said anything bad or any of this shit. No one intimidated. But you do have this strange little instinct of when you are absolutely ignorant in a situation of like, okay. After a while, I got used to it. And someone said hi to me, I said hi to them right back without flinching. Because experience actually helps the situation. But when it comes into this sort of thing, growing up in my household, between with my mom, my dad, my stepmom, lots of brothers, or my regular brothers, one word I never thought. There's never been an instance, an inference of like, if someone was I was pissed at, who was a different skin pigmentation, what do I call them? Or I think of them? I call them an asshole. Assholes are universal. There's just, I don't get the enzyme. I don't understand where you go to the racial part. And the closest, and I don't know why this is like becoming a confessional, but the closest that I think that I've ever gotten to that sort of like biasy in the negative, as opposed to the biasy from the point of ignorance, if you don't have any experience and you just have either stereotypes or you just don't know any better, at least you could learn and experience your way out of that, or try to. But when 9/11 hit, and every person who tries to be good tries to do this crowbar separation as to what terrorists were and what everyday folk was, who was an Arabic descent or Arabic nationals, who are Muslim, who are just living their lives. But when you're like 20 or so, see, I was what? How old was I? 20. Oh shit, 22 or 23 at that point. And you get it. You get that. You just get that forehead down. It's just like, let's go get these motherfuckers. And it's like and you get that little blood taste in it, and you go, and it says, don't just get Al Qaeda. No. This shit should stop now worldwide. Every single terrorist group, right? Just go after them. You know who had the rational position of that actually calmed the bloodlust? And it's ironic for me to say so. George W. Bush. Despite how we got into, I mean, you can find some justification going to the war in Afghanistan, but Iraq, no, there isn't anyway. Dick Cheney was coming up ideas in the little office he commandeered in the Pentagon just to come up with shit. But the one thing that George W. Bush did, especially in the early portion, where he could have raised a 1 million man and woman army just for the purposes of avenging our fallen on 9/11, is that he made it clear that the war was against the terrorists. Those individual terrorists. It wasn't against Islam. It wasn't against any particular Arabic people. And you know what? For that common sense, I would say we should be grateful that he had the wherewithal at that moment to give us the pause of like going, all right, figure out who the actual enemy is. Not everybody else. Don't be indiscriminate. Don't be these like morons who like go and stomp on a family or because they happen to be wearing like a headscarf or a turban, and then realize, oop, they're Sikhs. No. See, that was a great thing he did in order to remind people that there is an enemy at the time, but that enemy is not a representation of everybody that you happen to see that has a different skin pigmentation than you, or believes in a religion that may be being used as the scapegoat or being used as justification for horrendous actions, but is not representative of the faith. So therefore, anybody else who believes in that faith is not the enemy. They're not the ones that attacked you. But that was the closest I've ever gotten to having that racial bias, pretty much racist thought process. And when it calmed down, I felt pretty sick about it. Because, yeah, we have to take this shit as a case-by-case basis. You can't go, oh, this person did this, so everybody that is like that person is culpable for the one person doing this. And unfortunately, we see this in, it's not just a racial issue, and it's not just a faith issue. We see this in various other quarters of our social interactions, and in what we deal with in almost an everyday, even almost a current day here. Now, sort of a side tangent is how issues of transgender folk, people who try to live their lives, and what happens when certain people say or do things which are pretty fucked up that can actually damage everyone else because of it. And the multifaceted issues concerning things like bathrooms and so forth, where, right or wrong, everyone has a justifiable issue, and we get into loggerheads because we don't know what the proper response to this is. Maybe, even in 2023, maybe we're not quite ready or mature enough as a society to figure out the best course of actions. But because of these things up in the air, certain people get demonized. And, I'm not, because I don't really have much of a dog in this hunt, because one of the major arguments on one side is done by people who are parents, and they're concerned about their kids if they go to a public bathroom and somebody who is transgender is in that bathroom, and they get concerned because something could happen. Now, because I'm not a transgender person, I can't really, jump on, I can't jump on, and just claim one thing when I can't, back it up with, personal experience or anything. But the one concern, since I'm not a parent either, the one concern is as valid as the other concern of some people just wanting to have the respect of going where they're going, and I that. But the problem with that, though, is that every demographic has assholes in it. Again, universal term. We all have assholes. And the problem is that in this day and age, as I tried to rail a few minutes ago upon not taking what happened in 9/11, not taking what terrorists did, a small group of people, even a small, in a grand scheme of world population, a small network of people around the globe, what did or were trying to do or was planning to do, and not blow it out to every person who happens to be Arabic or Persian or Muslim, or if you don't know any better, Sikh, and it comes out, but again, even in 2023, the activities of a small group of shitty, fucked up people that could be of any demographic, but we'll say those who claim to be transgender, who maybe they are, maybe they're not, but use it as a cover so they could do evil shit. You have to it should not be a common disclaimer to say no other transgender male or female is responsible for the actions of this small group. But unfortunately, the actions of this small group causes the pause for people who are concerned about their family. And whether it's rational or irrational, it is an issue, and it is one of these things that we get loggerhead over. And that gets thrown into the whole argument of woke too, because having respect for transgender men or women, that becomes a woke thing. It's too woke. It's too woke to treat them like human beings, to treat them as if we're supposed to have respect for them. I mean, you look at our media, and you look at various movies of the old days of where there's cross-dressing, or there's people who are drag queens, or people who are supposedly transgendered and how they're referred to, all this tragic comic relief, or people are cross-dressing in order to get some sort of advantage that they didn't have beforehand. I mean, for whatever the motivations of the movie, I mean, now, from Tootsie to Mrs. Doubtfire, Some Like It Hot, etc., etc. I mean, you look at the time periods of when they're watching the movies, or when the movies came out, on the audiences of that day and age, and what their mindsets were, and they're going and watching it. What do you think the reaction is from there, and how, if those movies came out now, how the public response would be with that? I don't know. A powerful fucking movie was Boys Don't Cry. And that's one of those things that, that gives you pause upon how people treat people that they don't understand. And how, especially amongst a group of people who don't understand, you think it's all fine to torment, torture, do horrible shit, and kill. And if it wasn't, just think of every demographic that had to go through that, at least in American history. And by people who think they're not doing anything wrong when they're doing the worst wrong possible. Then they go home to their families and they fall right asleep as if there's nothing weighing on their conscience, nothing. Wake up, go to church, and they think, gosh, I'm such a good Christian. This is a rant. Doesn't have to make sense. Well, mostly. Well, mostly it does make sense, but not always. But basically, from the starting point of this, which was about the uses of the term woke, especially on the right, I don't know if it's... They co-opted the word and are just ignoring the actual original definition, or they're just going to ignore it. Woke is now a buzzword. It's a political buzzword. Anything they don't like, it's woke. Except for those who use the term woke as a translation so they don't use the word N-word. Or not even the phrase N-word. And maybe after a while, when it becomes that obvious that that's being used, then we're just going to call it the W word, aren't we? Holy Lord, it's been like 45 minutes. This is like how long it was I've done lately. So when I said earlier that this was going to be short, fibbed. Sorry guys, but lot to say, apparently. The ranter rants because the urge to rant is rising. And who knows? Maybe there's something be interesting to report about in a day or so. Perhaps. I don't know. Still seems a little bit hot air to me, but who's to say? Good night.